Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Mcleod-Skinner. I'm a proud rural Oregonian who believes in protecting our democracy, and that includes learning about and electing good leaders we can trust to serve all Oregonians. Election day is less than a week away. If you haven't yet voted, please do. Research your candidates, and then drop off your ballot in a designated drop box or at your county clerk's office, because it's too late to mail your ballot, and it must be received by our county clerk by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd, and postmarks don't count. So my team and I have spent the past few months, and I should say my volunteer team and I as a volunteer has spent the past few months helping emerging leaders across our state connect with voters. And in the past month, that's included providing mostly a focus on younger and rural and BIPOC candidates, but really emphasizing the importance of every race on your ballot. And that also includes judicial races. Most voters have an opinion about presidential races and legislative races and even city council races. But a lot of folks will say, who's this when it comes to judicial races? And the fact is that the races are nonpartisan, and judges are expected to keep a low profile. And that makes it even tougher to learn about the people running. So I'm having a conversation today with Rima Ghandour, who is running for the Multnomah County Judge. And after asking a little bit about her background, we'll go on to really focus our conversation on how we can improve our court system here in Oregon, how we can make it more equitable and responsive to all Oregonians. So Rima, welcome.
Hi, Jamie. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. And just in full disclosure, you're running in a contested race. I've got friends who, and my wife and I live in Central Oregon, so we're not voting in Multnomah County, but I've got friends who have voted for both you and your opponent, Adrian Brown. I also just had a great conversation with Adrian, but there's an important perspective that you bring to this discussion of equity in our courts, and that's really what the focus of our conversation will be about today. So let me just start out actually first by asking you a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about your background and include your legal work.
So, Jamie, you said you're a proud rural person. I'm a proud Arab American. I'm a proud immigrant. I'm also a proud Muslim. Came to the US.
If I may say, I apologize. Assalamu alaikum. I should have started with that.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam.
And just anyone who's freaked out by that, all I said was peace be upon you. If you're freaked out at saying peace to someone, then we've got a bigger problem. So anyway.
And I said peace be on you too, Jamie.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I immigrated to the US when I was 18 to New York, and then went to college there, went to law school in California, worked there for 4 years, and moved to Oregon in 2002. I'm a mom of 2 boys and 3 dogs right now. And I also run my own practice. I've owned a woman certified law firm for the last 7.5 years. Through my career, I've done a lot. Right now, I am 50% plaintiff personal injury work and 50% defense, usually contractors, commercial litigation. So between 2 businesses. I've tried cases in state court. I've worked for the public guardian doing mental health trials, and and I've spent a lot of time working on equity and access issues. I finished my presidency of the Multnomah chapter of the Oregon Women's Lawyers, which is called appropriately the Queen's Bench, and also the Multnomah Bar Association. And I'm still on the board. I was one of the founders of the Arab American Cultural Center in Oregon. So that's just in a nutshell. You can find out more if you want to dig in on my website or call me.
Great, thank you. And before we jump into the focus of our conversation, I always like to ask this question of folks that I interview. It's a personal question, but what historical figure or leader inspires you and why? So,
Jamie, I know it's probably the anti-stereotype, but I come from a very strong line of strong woman, a line of really strong women from both maternal and paternal. But the one, my grandma, my teta, who passed away, is one of the most amazing, wise humans and kind humans I had ever met. And this will probably come into our conversation later, but she died at the age of 98, never learning to read or write. Yet she is, if you talk to her and you go to her with a problem, you want to listen to her. You know, her life, her lived experience, and just the compassionate way she deals with issues, whether family issues or other issues. And, you know, she is one of the people I look at the most when I go, who do I admire?
I really appreciate that. Grandmas have such a potentially huge impact on us. And actually, I wear both my grandmas have passed, but I wear their rings around my neck to, as I say, keep them close to my heart. But one of my grandmas, who I was very close to, who was Mormon, and who I had one of the most amazing coming out experience when I came out to her as a young woman, was just such a supportive and loving response that it's a whole other story for another time. But grandmas and the power of grandmas is not lost on me at all. So thank you for that story. So let's transition into our conversation. And let me start with a really basic question, because there's a lot of misinformation or lack of understanding about this. Very simply, what does a judge do?
Well, a judge is not a prosecutor. Let's just get that out. I've texted with over 100,000 voters in Multnomah County personally. And that's probably the number one issue or question is, are you going to prosecute this group or this group? And it's like, I'm not a prosecutor, you know, the judge will not prosecute. So the judge will hear cases. So if it's a jury trial, they will be sort of the keeper of the evidence, what comes in and what comes out of what the jury gets to hear. They don't get to make the decision for the jury. They will get to make decisions regarding sentencing if it's a criminal case. If it's a civil case, again, they don't say you get $100 and you get $0 if it's a jury trial. Sometimes judges do sit in bench trials, and then they are the judge and the jury. They get to determine what stays and what goes, but also get to make that determination of the result of the trial. But a lot of what the judge does is discovery motions, so just sort of the day-to-day running of the cases. To, you know, when parties have problems, they come in front of the judge. They make a decision on whatever the issue is. So that's a lot of what a judge does. Obviously, there's arraignments and all kinds of things, but you know, most people concentrate on the trials. That's probably the judge making decisions on a trial other than evidence is the least thing they do, because, you know, usually they're jury trials, not bench trials. I don't know if that's
Would it be fair to say that the judge is kind of the shepherd of the process, of our judicial process, and helping to maintain kind of trust in the system?
Yes, very much so. I mean, our democracy is three pillars, right? You've got your legislators, you've got the presidency, you've got the judiciary, and that's where people's rights are supposed to be protected. That's when you have an issue, whether it's with your neighbor, with your business, with state agencies. This is where state court, right? So that's a difference. This is where you come to get those resolved. And it's very important that you do trust in it, because if you don't, you're not going to go there. That's not what you're going to go to resolve your issues. And there is a big issue of trust with whether judges are going to be fair. I mean, that's one of the big concerns people have.
Yeah, and then you mentioned kind of the federal system. We've even got this at the state level as well. So instead of the president, we have the governor, who's the executive branch. We have the legislative branch, who holds the purse strings, and then of course we have our judicial system. And then to follow up on what you're saying, and got a little background on this myself, but also that we have each county has its circuit court, and so in your case, you're looking at the Multnomah Circuit Court. Multnomah County being one of our 36 counties. And so wherever folks are around Oregon, each county will have their own circuit court. So judges will be on our ballots. So even if you're not in the Portland area, they're not necessarily going to see your name or Adrian's name. They're going to see names from across the state, or their county, their circuit court essentially is the names they're going to see on their ballots.
Jamie, I like to consider it sort of like the people's court. This is where people go before, you don't get to the Supreme Court immediately. This is where most people's contact with the judicial system, whether it's a traffic ticket or something else, this is where you go. So it's where humanity is, right? This is where people come by themselves a lot of the time to come ask something of the court.
So to that point, what are, in your view, what are some of the strengths of our, and let's just focus on Oregon courts at this point. If you want to talk about Multnomah Circuit Court, that's fine. But generally speaking, here in Oregon, what are some of the strengths of our court system, and what are some opportunities for improvement? And to those opportunities for improvement, I mean, there's a lot of conversation right now about equity and fairness and people's voices being heard. And so how do we do a better job at that? So sorry, I threw two questions in there, but the first one is really, what are some strengths? And then what are some of those areas we can improve?
So in terms of access, some of the strengths are, we call it lovingly trial by ambush. We don't allow expert discovery in Oregon, right? So that allows people to bring their cases with very little, much less investment beforehand than you would in Washington or California. It could make the difference between, it's going to cost $10,000 to bring the case, in terms of expert discovery versus 40 or 50 or 60,000. That's a big difference also between federal and state court. That is one. I think for most counties, our judges are talking about equity issues and procedural justice. So that's great. And we try to get cases, take the exception of COVID out, done quickly within usually a year, which is great, because if you don't have, if you don't have these trial dates and you don't have these trials, you're not, if you've got injured, you're not going to get money because you're going to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years like some other states. One of the weaknesses is generally a lack of diversity. Sorry about that. Two is the budget for the courts is not independent, right? Even though they're an independent part of our democracy, the budget is not. So it's easy to cut the budget, and the courts are functioning at a lower budget since the recession. Yeah. There's going to be more cuts. And when you cut the budget, you're going to cut access, you're going to cut programs that are there to help people get access to the courts. So that's the worrisome part right now.
Well, and as attorneys know, have to go through continuing education, CLEs. And so there's that piece to kind of keep informing and educating the attorneys and those who are kind of part of that process, but also on the side of accessibility for folks in the community and accessing and fair access to our judicial system. I want to talk about that a little bit, because this is near and dear to my heart. So for several years, I worked for the International Rescue Committee, both in emergency relief overseas, and then in the States, I ran a refugee resettlement office. And I consistently would see the challenges that refugees and also many immigrant communities would have with different systems within our government, period, but especially the court system. And things like translation was always a huge issue because that complexity of words and meanings. But so as you're talking about resources being cut, obviously that's also resources that might help people access and understand to be able to communicate. So what are some of the challenges, those still opportunities for improvement, or some of the challenges you've seen with the communities face within the legal system?
Yeah, so I want to preface this just with understanding, because I don't want immigrants and refugees to be the scapegoat here. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Literacy rates in the US, whether you're an immigrant or not, are pretty dismal, actually. Supposedly 50% of people can't read and comprehend past an 8th grade level. And I'm bringing this up because, if you've ever sat in a jury, those jury instructions are complex, right? Whether English is your second language or third language, or it's, the language you were born speaking. So trying to simplify and get it to a point that it is easy to understand, because actually serving on a jury is, one of our duties, one of the things about how we make sure people get what they need to get their rights settled. And having a jury, and this is where an issue that's pretty important. So having a jury that looks like you and sounds like you is important. And when you have a jury, and I know half my family has really heavy accents, there's a tendency to, once the attorneys and the judges hear a very heavy accent of somebody, they could have a PhD, but they have a heavy accent, to just excuse them from jury service based on that, not because they can't understand, let alone, can we get somebody who's maybe an English learner, a translator on the jury so they can participate in our democracy. But there's this instinct, like we know, like there's Batson cases. You can't dismiss somebody from a jury just based on their race, right? But there's nothing like that with their accent or their inability to, in your opinion, understand, comprehend, participate in the system. So when you, this whole having a jury of your peers, our counties are changing, right? And having a jury of your peers should include refugees and immigrants and, our deaf community. I mean, that's another, accommodation and access issue, right? Not just coming and being in court, but serving and being able to sit in a jury. You tell me when I go too much, but the other thing, then you've got all of these immigrants and people who have a hard time, American people, like Americans who have a hard time understanding, it's a complicated system and they're coming in pro se. And, you're asking.
Pro se means without an attorney representing you.
And we're expecting
translation right there.
Yes, right there. And yes, we usually actually have switched to saying self-represented party. As somebody who never studied Latin, I hate the words that I don't understand in English, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. But we're expecting them to come and analyze codes and be able to represent themselves, right, in a very complicated way. And we may have some written instructions, but not everybody learns and understands through writing, right? When the pandemic hit, I did videos because the courts were putting instructions on what they were doing in English on their website in writing. So I actually did little videos to translate it, but I did it in English via video and in Arabic via video. I had my husband do it through Spanish, had a friend do it in Chinese and Mandarin, and then had it in writing too, because again, not everybody is going to be comprehending what they need to, whether it's the governor's orders or the court's order, or know to go to a website and sit there and analyze for them, because it took me a while to go, what is the order really saying? So these are all issues of access.
Let me just, Rima, jump in on that, because just to unpack some of the stuff that you said, because I think there's a lot of really key learnings in that. I mean, and first of all, you mentioned that jury of your peers. So if that's our system that says you get to be judged based on a jury of your peers, and the folks in that jury box are very different from me coming before them, then it's an unlevel playing field, because they won't necessarily understand some of my experience and some of my background and some of those pressures, because there's, we are complex human beings, as you said. And also that implicit bias. The Oregon State Bar did a little video on implicit bias. It's a great video. People can Google it and check it out, but trying to start to dig away at some of our own biases. Also, actually, Dr. Bryant Marks from Morehouse College has a great training he does on implicit bias, and pointing out that we all have it. It's part of how we survive, how we've learned, but to realize, to be self-aware of that. And so realizing that our systems have that, it's that systematic racism that people talk about, the systematic and embedded structures that create either don't even see or hear people, or also create this unlevel playing field. And so leaning into it and realizing we have that problem, and then working to make changes to correct it and address that imbalance, I think is such a key thing right now. The other piece that you mentioned about the translation, and this is something I saw a lot working again with refugee and immigrant communities, is words are very important, words are very powerful, but there's words and there's also meanings, and there's also cultural nuances and interpretations of those words and meanings. And one of the things I found in work I've done throughout my life, both in the States and overseas, is just trying to get to that deeper understanding of what is being meant by something. I mean, so you're talking about jury instructions as this really kind of dry, here's the how-to piece. Even a direct translation can sometimes not get the meaning across. And the story I usually tell, and this just on a personal level, is when I was working in Kosovo, I was working with another engineer. We were focused on engineering projects at the time. And we technically had no language in common, but we could better communicate by diagrams and through a little pidgin language you developed. We could better communicate meaning back and forth than we could through speaking to an interpreter who spoke both of our languages fluently. And that sense of what is said in words versus meaning, I mean, these are things that folks working across cultural, lines and language barriers see all the time. But then when you look at with our court system and words, manner, and folks' decisions being made based on people's what is said and what is interpreted on behalf of someone, it opens all sorts of opportunities for misunderstanding and the system not working like it should.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, I can jump in here. It's always fun being in a deposition, and that's where, you get to question the other parties. Where I have a client who's Arabic speaking, and I obviously understand what they're saying, and there's an interpreter there, and then listening to the interpretation, and a lot of words, especially if people are using expressions. My favorite is a client kept saying, "My soul left my body," which is an expression we use in Arabic. And it's more like, I got so frustrated, I just, couldn't handle it anymore. Like, I've had it up to here kind of thing. But like, an interpreter would interpret the words exactly as they say. And watching the other side struggle for 20 minutes to unpack, what do you mean? You died on the scene? Like, what happened, right? It's comic in some ways, but again, you go, this is all lost in translation. And frankly, I mean, I have the experience with it, and that's why I care about it. When I first came to the US, I came when I was 5. I'm blind in one eye. I don't know if you can tell, but I came when I was 5 to get surgery. Doctor had botched my eye in Lebanon, and my mom spoke some English. I didn't. I was 5. And I remember the fear being in the hospital because there was no interpreter, and we're relying on my mom's English. And I remember having to go into surgery, and I had no clue what was going on. And I've always been stubborn, right? And I was like, "You're not moving me from here. I don't care what you're doing." And I started fighting them that they had to get orderlies to tie me down to take me to surgery, because I was so scared. I did not know what was going on. Yeah. And that's a language barrier, right? And, you can take it with an adult who it's a stressful situation. They don't know what they're doing in court. There's this language barrier they're trying to figure out. It's just going to make a situation that's bad so much worse.
Well, and even beyond that, if someone's coming from a country where the judicial system means you're going to be killed, which that's true in some countries, someone's absolute terror of being in that environment, even if it's like traffic court, but that fear, depending on your experience and where you're coming from, can totally freeze you up. And so, and then the barriers you're talking about, if someone is blind or is hearing impaired, to make sure again that meaning, and also that it's partially the building up the trust of the system, but making sure the system actually creates a level playing field for folks. And we know there's opportunities for improvement. Let me switch a little bit, because this is really, voters right now are those who haven't voted are looking at their voter pamphlets and trying to think, okay, judge, who's, what is the job? And you talked about what the job is earlier. And this is for judicial races across our state. As a voter, what would you advise me on things that I should be looking for credentials and skills, and what we should be thinking about for a judge? And I recognize that you're a candidate yourself, but there's some truisms here. So what are some of the things that you would advise me or other voters to look for?
I think one of the main ones would be temperament. How a judge will react. It's, a judge is in very stressful situations, right? You're listening to a lot of stressful things. It's a busy docket day. What is their judicial temperament? How do they react to situations? Another one is experience, but it's experience. People are like, "Oh, you must be a trial lawyer to be a judge." Some of the best trial lawyers in the world would make horrible judges. So it's not being a trial lawyer. It's being able to look at issues from both sides, being able to make informed decisions. And frankly, you talked about the bias. For me, it's making sure you understand you have these biases and questioning your decisions with the bias understanding. I don't care if it's you, me, whoever it is going to have biases. And when you make a decision, just stepping back for a nanosecond and saying, am I letting my bias towards this issue or this person inform my decision? I think that's a very important thing, is that acknowledgement. And for me, I think community involvement is important to look at, and just the breadth of cases. This kind of court is basically so many things come through the door. Nobody's going to be an expert at everything, or maybe one thing or 10 things, but not 50 or 100. But has the attorney done a whole bunch of different kinds of work so that they've shown the skills to be able to interpret laws in different areas. Those are some of the things. And again, it's hard. It's an obscure position. Usually they're not contested elections. So we don't have them on the ballot often where there's more than one person who's an incumbent.
Yeah, well, and I mean, to that point, and of course, in the Oregon State Bar, there's an expectation, including part of the oath, of expectation of collegiality. So how, it's got to be incredibly tough. I've never run for judge. It's got to be incredibly tough to run for judge, not have that partisan aspect, and then also have that, meet that higher expectation. And so, you know, I recognize, again, in your race with yourself and your colleague who's running, that additional pressure. But I mean, I guess I ask you straight up, given that expectation and partiality, is it tough to be a judicial candidate?
It is actually very tough, because as somebody who, you know, works in an adversarial, you know, you have cases, you usually want to argue every point, right, in your case. It's hard to just step back and be like, I'm just talking about me, and that's all I'm going to talk about. But it's the right thing to do. Also, it is hard because you want to sit and, as I said, go point by point. Well, wait, I did this or I did that. But it's really, it's not just our oath, it's how we want our courts to be run, how we want our attorneys to behave, right? We want to be able to be against you one day, and then 2 weeks later have a case where maybe we're on the same side and we're aligned. I mean, that's how it works. It's a small enough community. And then we have ethics rules. There's both for attorneys, but also for judicial candidates, where you can't, you know, people are like, who are you voting for? Like, I can't tell you. I'm not allowed to support or endorse, right? You know, I think I can say what my party is. That's about it if I'm asked directly. So we are very limited, and people get frustrated when they're talking to you, because they're like, well, you're not telling me what you're going to do in this case. And I'm like, I cannot tell you, because I can't prejudge a case without all the evidence and all the facts and the law in front of me. So yeah, it is really hard, because as a regular person, you can say A, B, and I support this and I fight this, and this is what I want to do. As a judicial candidate, it's more what I've done in the past.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the time. We're running short on time. Thank you for informing us about some of the things, that office, and ways we can improve our court system. I appreciate your commitment to this higher goal of making our system better. I can say, in speaking to your colleague who you're running against, also express that higher vision for our system. And it's something that I think it serves all of us very well. For folks who are in Multnomah County, want to learn more about you, what's your website? And this is now putting your candidate hat on. What's your campaign website?
It's Rima for Judge, RIMA for Judge. And that's also my social handle. So it's funny to say that, but that's my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So it's Rima for Judge.
Okay, thank you. And then just to let people know, the colleague you're running against, Adrienne Brown, it's Adrienne for Judge is her website. If people want to check out her website as well. Much respect. Thank you for running. Thank you for this information, but also your commitment to our system. Like I said, both you and your colleague are, I know, respected by folks, friends of mine from across the political spectrum. So thank you for stepping up and looking to serve our community. It's greatly appreciated. And thanks especially for the perspective that you bring. I know that, I know from personal friends that even running as a quote unquote out Muslim, it means you're targeted. The experience you bring in that background and making sure you're hearing and speaking up to make sure that communities are heard is also something that I think we all can do. And you know, hopefully as Oregonians, we lean into this and use this as a time to make our systems and our state a better place. So thank you for your contribution to doing that. And then to those of you who've joined us, thank you so much. If you haven't yet voted, please do. It's critically important. And every single race is important. So first of all, being an informed voter, we have some great candidates running. And every race is important. So yes, there's a lot of talk of the presidential race, but legislative races, city council races, sheriff's races, and of course, per our conversation today, judicial races, all really important because these are folks who are making decisions that impact our lives and the lives of our families. If you have not yet voted, you can't mail it. It's too late to mail your ballot. Do your research, fill it out, make sure you sign the back, and then drop it off at a designated drop box over the county clerk's office. And then after Tuesday, we will have the results and we'll need folks to be able to move forward together. We as Americans are blessed with a system that allows us to argue and haggle over different issues and different perspectives, but really for the better good of our communities, of our state and our country. Being able to work together for the higher purpose is something that I think will, as difficult as we're going to need to transition on this election and have a positive step forward. So thank you, everyone. Your vote is your voice, and make sure your voices are heard. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Rima.
Thank you.